my introduction to trans athletes in sport actually came about a year ago, January 2018, when I was asked to serve on a gender committee for Athletics Canada, the national governing body for track and field in Canada. And it turned out that I had the opportunity to look at some documents that showed what sort of a trans inclusion policy meant. And I guess we always want to include trans people and everybody in sport, but what I noticed is that it meant, the way the policy was written, it meant that boys and men, male athletes, would be allowed into female sports. And as a human biologist, I know that that's really unfair, that the male body has an extraordinary advantage in terms of heart function, lung volume, bone structure, muscle strength. There's just so many things from a biological perspective that cannot really be overridden or undone. And so we need to figure out a way that to have a policy that, you know, doesn't harm women and girls or make sport inaccessible to female athletes. My biggest concern is that I don't really know how we can run a sport, especially the female athlete section in sport, if we're going to have a completely open category. Inevitably, if enough people identify into women's sport, women just won't really have a chance. They won't be making the finals. They won't be making the podiums. They will be very discouraged. And we've done everything we can for the last 50 years to encourage women and girls to be involved in sport. And it just seems like a step backwards to put female athletes at a disadvantage. And so the other part of the policy, I think, that really bothers me is that officials are going to be very, very frightened and afraid to say anything if they're getting sort of maybe intimidated by the issue. And if we can't have officials volunteering for our sport, we don't have competitions. That means we really don't have sport. So I think it threatens sport in a very sort of subtle way. And really at the grassroots level, we will find us almost impossible to run sport unless we have a really clear understanding about where the lines are. I would say my ideal solution would be twofold. Either have an open section that male athletes and anybody else sort of who identifies differently could be in an open section, and then there would be a closed section for female athletes, because that they're the ones that would be most impacted by anything that would be blurring the lines. So we either have an open and then female, or we have a middle, like a third category. I think that would be the other option. Well, Alberta's policy, we're still writing it, and the rest of the country kind of has a cut and paste policy that was first proposed by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. And I think they did not include a lot of other people in Canada in terms of women and a lot of the different sectors of sport, officials, coaches, presidents. They did not include a lot of people when they set up the trans inclusion policy. And so I think it's a very unbalanced policy. We were given about a year or two ago sort of recommended policy that would be trans inclusive, but everybody, just because they're a little bit uncomfortable with the situation and with the topic, most associations just do a cut and paste of a policy either from the IOC or from the national governing body, and they haven't put a lot of thought into it. And I think here in Alberta, we would like to actually put some thought into it about fairness, and something that will be comprehensive and fair, and that will make sure that we're not violating anybody's legal rights to being included in sport, including, again, women and girls. So we need to make sure that our policies are done correctly, and so that everybody is treated with respect. Within Athletics Alberta, I literally took this to our people at the AGM in Red Deer in 2018, and I literally said, this is an issue that's coming down in sport, and that we're going to need to have a decision or two made about athletes self-IDing into different sex categories. and people were more or less shocked. But I would say 95 to 99% of everybody in that room agreed that as president, I should be standing firm for the rights of women and girls to have their sex-based category and clear delineations, so that we don't have sort of a situation where there's uncertainty about which sex is in which category. Well, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport is the one that had a working group that proposed some policies, and then other sports have sort of taken up certain aspects of the CCES and the IOC policy, which was in 2015, the International Olympic Committee brought in a policy that male athletes could self-ID into female sports, as long as they declared that a year in advance and reduced their hormone levels to 10 nanomole per liter. So there's just certain specifics about the policy that enable a male athlete to self-ID into female sport, but at hormone levels that are almost 30 times higher than what female athletes are allowed to have. And if a female athlete had those same levels, the levels that allow the male athlete into women's sport, if a female athlete would have those levels, she would be considered to be cheating and she would be banned from the sport. So we're actually having, even when we reduce the hormonal levels for the trans athletes, especially male to female transitioning athletes, even at that, we're giving them a huge advantage in a way that we would never allow women and girls to have. And so if we actually just have that policy cut and pasted, that's going to be really difficult. The other thing is, when you have the limit for women, which is 5 nanomole per liter, if you're going to make, let's say, male athletes come to that level, there's a problem of how do you monitor that? Because the minute you stop putting hormones into the system, the male body, the hormone level jumps back to the big level, and we don't have enough money in sport to constantly be medically monitoring that. So if we can't monitor the hormone levels on a consistent basis, then what are we saying? Then we're just going to have to trust that everybody who comes into sport is abiding by some sort of biological hormonal level, that medical level that nobody really has a handle on. So I don't think that policy necessarily is the answer. That's why if you have an XY chromosome, which means XY karyotype male, you really shouldn't have access to female sport in a sense. You should have maybe another category. Yeah, internationally, it's interesting. As I sought for help and assistance in Athletics Alberta, I was looking to try to formulate a policy that would make sense. I was contacted by Fair Play for Women in the UK, Fair Go for athletes. I think it's Fair Go in New Zealand. There's various organizations around the world where women are starting to become aware of the threat to female sport, and are trying to figure out how do we influence the international sport policies in a way that's fair. Yeah, so Chris Moser is one of the few cyclists who has gone from female to IDing as a male, and has done quite well internationally. And there probably are a few others. But the problem with that is that if it's a female athlete transitioning to the male category, then she is taking hormones. At some point, we still have to figure out when her hormone levels are too high for her to be continually competing with other female athletes. So then we do have to make sure that we're monitoring at what level or at what point in the transition the person really does have to go completely over to the male side. And so, yeah, there are some female athletes that identify as male, but very, very few, and most of them don't win. In fact, nobody wins. Even Chris Moser is probably in the top, finishing group, maybe in the finalists of men's cycling at her age group, but but still not winning necessarily. So that just shows the biological difference between males and females. Males are always going to be, you take the best male athlete, it's always going to be better than the best female athlete, no matter what hormones you put into the system.